You do not need to be a trust fund baby in order to afford horses. You do not need to make $1 million a year to be able to afford horses. Trust me. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. If you're new here, my name is Katrina. And yes, as much as some people would like you to think, you do not need to have gobs and gobs of money in order to afford horses. Yes, they do cost money, but depending on how you approach things, they may not cost as much as you think. And there is a way to afford horses in a reasonable way. You might be wondering, hey, why should I listen to this girl about being able to afford horses? I am a CPA. I'm a certified accountant. I know a thing or two about money. And on top of that, I have owned horses for basically my entire life. I'm very well versed in how much horses cost. And let's be honest, I'm a little cheap. So I have found ways to be able to take care of my horses well, do the things that I want to do with my horses, all while not spending every single penny that I make on my horses. Before we get into the whole how do you afford horses or how do you make horses more affordable, I think it's useful to just talk about the spectrum of horse ownership, because there's definitely a wide range of how much people spend on their horses and just the different amounts of money that can be put into someone's horse. So let's start at the very bottom. The very bottom, I would say, is not where I want you to be. Even if you are like minimum wage, don't have a lot of money, I do not want you to be at the very bottom of this spectrum, because the very bottom of the spectrum looks like buying a horse very, very, very cheaply, not spending money on feed or any sort of health care for that horse, and just kind of letting them live off the land, fend for themselves, neglecting the horse. We do not want you there. You invested the initial cost of the horse, and that's pretty much it. We don't want you there. So I will say outright, like, you are going to have to spend money on your horses. There is no just letting your horse live off the land. That is neglect. I am not in support of that at all. At the very other end of the spectrum, we think of the rich people, right? The rich people with horses. So they have the very expensive barns and indoor arenas. They have the very, 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 very top bloodlines that they have in their horses that are obviously very expensive. They have full-time trainers on hand, full-time coaches. They might have, private grooms and farriers. They have a vet. Like, it is all expenses incurred. These horses are treated like royalty. They probably have better quality food and grass and water than I personally do. Like, it's the very, very elite top side of the horse world, right? I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you're going to be somewhere in between neglect and royalty. We're somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. I know that's definitely where I fall. So based on that spectrum, we're going to look at a few different categories about where expenses come up when it comes to horse ownership and how to make those expenses a bit more affordable. And one other thing I want to just say before we get into this again, I'm not going to talk about the initial purchase price of the horse. Horses vary very much, again, in how much they are going to cost you. You might find some horse at an auction for, $250. And then there's other horses that are worth millions of dollars, right? So I'm not going to talk about that in terms of affordability. I would just say you need to approach that like an investment. So I saved up money for my horses for that initial investment that I'm hoping is going to last me for a long time. But you also have to remember that, yes, there's that initial investment that you need to save up for, but there's going to be ongoing costs. And that's what we're focusing on today, is just the ongoing costs as opposed to the initial purchase price of the horse that you're getting. The first category that I want to talk about is feed, nutrition, all those good things. So I am a big proponent of the bulk of your horse's diet should be from forage, whether that be hay or pasture. That's what horses are designed to eat. They're designed to be grazers that are out in a pasture eating through large chunks of the day. If we can keep them as close to what they were optimally designed for, the better. With that being said, our land, the grasses and everything, they do not contain the same nutrients that they might have hundreds of years ago. There are certain gaps in the nutrients that your horses might get from the grass or the hay that you have available. And that's where some sort of supplementation could come into play. But just going back into the forage for a second before we get into supplements, I encourage you to buy, like if you're having to buy hay, try and buy it in bulk if you can. For example, me, this time of year, it ends up being more expensive than the rest of the year because this month I will be paying for like 6+ months worth of hay, and that'll be my horse's forage for the entirety of winter. So I've had to plan for, okay, I'm gonna be spending a couple $1,000s on hay, but it's gonna last me, like I'll likely have some left over in the spring that I can use come next fall. And then once we hit spring next year, they're gonna be out on grass from spring till, this time next year. I don't have to pay for grass because I am very fortunate that I live on a ranch. We have pasture. Obviously we have to pay for the ranch, but pasture doesn't cost anything. Assuming we get enough moisture and sun, the pasture is available. So that's something that you need to consider. Try and buy in bulk where you can. I know that's not always feasible. You might not have grass available depending on, maybe you live in Arizona or something like that and grass isn't as plentiful. But investing in a high quality forage, given that that's the bulk of your horse's diet, you want it to be as high quality as possible. I personally feed a grass hay mix in the wintertime. I'm not really a fan of alfalfa. A little bit's okay, but I like my horses just on a grass mix. And I try to find the best quality that I can for them because, again, that is the bulk of what they're eating, and that's gonna in turn determine how they're gonna perform. If you are putting crap feed into your horse, you're gonna get crap performance and crap health coming out. They need the best quality feed that you can get. So in terms of affordability, I would encourage you not to try and cut corners here. You could easily buy slough grass or some sort of grass hay that's better suited for cows, but your horse might not thrive on that feed. Actually, I know they will not thrive on that feed. So I would encourage you not to cut corners when it comes to forage, if at all possible. Going back to the gaps in the nutrients in the hay and grass that you're feeding, that is where some sort of supplementation comes into play. However, supplements are just that. They are supplements. I think, in the human world, the supplement industry has done a very good job at thinking we need this laundry list of supplements in order to stay healthy. That's not the case. And the same is true with horses. You can buy all sorts of supplements for your horses. I would say the majority of them do not work. Your horse is just peeing out whatever you're putting into them. It's not worth it. This is where what I would suggest, sitting down with some sort of equine nutritionist, getting your hay tested so you know what nutrients are lacking, and then you can specifically supplement your horse's diet. Otherwise, I honestly think you're just wasting your money buying, the various supplements and whatever else that you think your horse needs. I know I was very guilty of this growing up. My favorite barrel racers would be, teamed up with this supplement and that supplement. And I thought, well, if her horse is running really fast with using that supplement, then obviously my horse needs that supplement. And no, we were completely wasting money. So again, bulk of your horse's diet should be high quality forage, and then some sort of maybe all around mineral might be a good idea. But if you're really unsure, definitely spend the money to talk to an equine nutritionist so that you can save money in the long term, not wasting your money buying unnecessary supplements. And I guess with me talking about, having a ranch where I'm able to pasture my horses, that kind of bleeds into our next category, which is boarding, location, where you are physically keeping your horse. I think for the majority of people, we usually have two options. You're keeping them on your own property, or you're boarding them at some sort of facility owned by usually a third party, right? So obviously, if you have your own farm, your own ranch, your own acreage, whatever your setup is, you're gonna have to pay for that place, right? Which is not cheap. As a ranch owner, I'm very, very aware that, okay, yeah, I have pasture available for my horses, but I have to pay everything related to keeping things going and just keeping the place in good condition, which is not cheap. The other option is keeping it at someone else's facility and just paying some sort of monthly boarding fee or something like that. Obviously, that can be a bit expensive too, depending on the level and type of facility that you're keeping your horse at. Before we lived here, I was keeping my horses just on a farm. We lived on an acreage that did not have enough room for horses, so I knew someone on a neighboring farm and he allowed me to keep my horses there. He charged me $50 a month during the winter and I think $100 during the summer. So when my horses were eating his pasture, I was paying $100. In the winter, when I was supplying feed and just keeping my horses there, but they weren't eating any of his feed, I was paying $50 a month. It was an awesome deal. Like, I was, just starting out in my accounting career. I didn't have a ton of money to be spending on board. It was fine. I did not have access to an indoor riding arena. I was riding my horses in a hay pasture, but I was still able to keep them fit. My horses were safe and sound and happy. It was fine, right? It's definitely a long ways from what's, potential circumstances could be, right? Living in an immaculate barn that does not smell like horses, having access to a massive indoor arena, having someone feeding my horses twice a day and taking care of them and exercising them when I'm not there. Like, that's an option too, but obviously I'm sure you can guess that that's going to be substantially more money than $50 a month. I personally don't want my horses in a place like that. I am much more the, keeping them close to nature, doing things myself, that kind of gal. So the $50 per month situation works for me, right? It may not work for you, again, depending on your budget, what you prefer, all those things will determine what works for your situation. But just know, again, there's a wide stretch of living conditions that would be available for you and your horse, depending on what works for your pocketbook. I know a lot of people have found ways to make boarding affordable by kind of bartering, I guess. So they kind of make a deal with the facility owner that, hey, if you'll let me keep my horse here and let me use the arena and, keep him in a pasture, I will clean stalls, or I will help you give lessons, or, whatever the case may be, right? Like, it might not be an actual, here's my cash that I'm giving you every month. It might be, here are my services that I'm available to compensate for keeping my horse here. So if you're willing and able to do something like that, you might not have the cash, but if you have free time where, hey, you can muck out a bunch of stalls several times a week, or whatever you guys agree upon, I would say that's a pretty good arrangement, right? And you just get to spend more time at the barn. Sounds like a good deal to me. Another spot where you might find costs starting to add up is in terms of training for your horse and riding lessons. So this kind of ties in with the initial purchase price of the horse. If you buy a very well-trained horse, that horse is going to be more expensive because someone has put in the time to train them. If you buy a less trained horse, it's going to cost less because that time hasn't been put in. That being said, once you buy the horse, if it's not that well-trained horse, but you want it to be, you're likely going to need to invest in some training for that horse in order to get it where you want. If, assuming you're not in a place to be training that horse yourself. Just like everything else in the horse world, there is a spectrum on how much you can pay for training. I do books for a guy, and I'm pretty sure he only charges $1,200 a month for training. I can guarantee there are trainers that charge substantially more than $1,200 a month for training. So depending on who you go with, depending on who you're comfortable riding your horse, the cost of training may have some wiggle room. I would also say it depends on how much training your horse needs, right? Typically, if you're sending your horse to training, it should be, in my opinion, they should be in training for like 60 days at a minimum, like depending on where your horse is at. But I just feel like the standard 30 days, I feel like is not enough for a horse. So minimum 60 days, so 2 months plus, depending on how much your horse needs. If we're at the bare bones, probably $1,200 a month and going up from there. So that's something you need to consider. The other option is for you to train your own horse. A few things I can tell you about that from personal experience. It takes a heck of a lot longer to get the results that you're looking at, and you might screw up. Be really honest with yourself about where your abilities lie and make a decision from there. Next is lessons, which kind of go hand in hand with training. I feel like some people think they constantly need to be riding with a coach or a trainer. I grew up in 4-H, so once a month I would have someone experienced watching me ride. I've gone to the occasional clinic, but I had a consistent coach for maybe a year, but other than that, I have not. Whereas I think sometimes people think that having a coach is required, and it's definitely not. It's very helpful, especially if you're a beginner and have no clue what you're doing. But as you get more and more experienced, I think you don't need a coach all the time. And there's tons of options to make lessons way more affordable. One, online. There are tons of trainers out there who now have programs. You can submit a video of your horse, you and your horse riding. They will send you back feedback, and it's very, very, very affordable. Another option is you can go to a clinic a couple times a year, get someone's eyes on you who's very experienced. I mean, I've gone to clinics from reserve world champion barrel racers. I'm not going to be able to get one-on-one lessons with her consistently, but if I can go to 1 or 2 of her clinics, that's huge. And again, clinics vary in price. Another option is to take lessons in a group. If a group of you are pooling your money together and getting lessons from one coach, that's a great way to save money as well. So lots of options. Again, another option is just, getting a lesson once or twice a month, or just, less frequently. You don't have to have someone's eyes on you all the time. There is something for figuring out on your own, learn to do by doing, as we say in 4-H, right? So lots of options. You can still make progress. You don't have to be completely on your own. YouTube is another great resource. Hello. But just, exploring your options. It's not always just you have to be at a barn working with a specific coach who has eyes on you 5 days a week. That would be awesome. I mean, I would probably be way further ahead if I did that, right? But that's not what I'm doing, so this is where I'm at. So trade-offs, that is what we're talking about today. There are trade-offs to be made, and depending on what you're going to be happy with is, what you're going to be willing to trade off, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Tack. If you want to spend money, go to somewhere like Irvine Tack in Crossfield, Alberta. Walls of headstalls and bits, a sea of saddles, jeans that would fit me for miles, boots. If you want to go bankrupt, go to Irvine Tack. That's what I have to say about that. My thoughts on tack. I view it as an investment. You do not want to buy cheap tack, especially your saddle pad, your bit. Those would be the three for sure that I do not want to cheap out on. I don't want my horse to have a sore back. I don't want my horse to have a sore mouth. So those are the big ones that I would not cheap out on. That being said, you do not need to buy it new. You can have substantial savings by buying good quality used equipment. I don't know, someone's getting out of horses, they have stuff for sale. Someone's kid has gone off to college, they're not using it anymore. Someone died and there's an estate sale. Those are great ways to find used equipment at a discounted rate. The great thing about good quality equipment is that it might be used. It might have been on a horse 1,000 times, but it's still in really good working condition because it's good quality. And that goes, for if you're deciding to buy something new, it's gonna last a long time if it's high quality. Like, you could buy something and it could literally last your entire riding career and maybe be used by your children. So yeah, I would just say do not cheap out. Do not cheap out, because there's nothing worse than having a horse with a sore back or a sore mouth. Things like brushes, halters, like, you want them to be working. You don't need to buy like name brand, top of the line, fancy stuff. So know what you're willing to compromise on, know what needs to be high quality, and kind of go from there. There's this one girl that I recently started following on Instagram. She showed a couple of reels at this point about her wall of headstalls. All of them fully equipped, headstall, bit, reins. I'm like, girl, I can guarantee you do not need all of those. You do not. I have a handful of things in my barn that work. Maybe there's something out there, a different bit that would work better for my horse. But you know what I got works. We're making progress. You do not need to have it all. You do not need to have it all. You can keep a modest collection of things that you use with, various horses, depending on what you're doing with them. You do not need to have a wall of bridles. Sorry. I feel like whenever you bring up costs with horses, the vet always comes up. Yes, the vet can be expensive for sure. I would say, what's the phrase? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Meaning it's better to prevent things than to have to pay for things afterwards. Granted, with horses, there's always freak things that are gonna happen. It's just the nature of owning horses. But if you can stay on top of vaccinations, deworming, teeth stuff, like those are the big ones for sure. And then just any little, like if your vet is having a look at your horse, twice a year, that's good. You can stay ahead of potential issues that are coming down the road, prevent things, all that good stuff. So I would say definitely develop a relationship with your vet, have them look at your horse a couple times a year. And I would highly recommend open up a new bank account specifically for this is your emergency fund. My horse put his foot through this thing happened, blah, blah, blah. It's gonna happen. Have an emergency fund. It's bad enough dealing with a hurt horse. It's 100 times worse dealing with a hurt horse and also trying to figure out how to pay for it. You could potentially look at insurance. I'm not going to get into that today. There is insurance for horses. I am not an expert on that at all. If that's something that you would potentially be interested in, definitely look into it. But an emergency fund, definitely a good idea. Aside from feed, I would say that my farrier is my next most frequent cost with my horses. So in spring, winter, fallish, he's out here every 6 weeks. In the winter, every 8 to 10 weeks, depending on how fast their feet are growing. I would say it's just something you have to do. When at the start of this episode, I mentioned the people that neglect their horses. I feel like this is the one thing that gets dropped off and drives me nuts. When I see a horse with super long feet that obviously have not been trimmed for months, it drives me nuts, because everyone knows no hoof, no horse. You can screw up your horse's legs so bad by not having their feet trimmed on a regular basis. There's so many bad things that can happen from not maintaining your horse's feet properly. Get your horse's feet trimmed. Do not cut corners on this. And if your farrier says hey, you need to do this corrective thing, do it, because it will screw up so many things throughout the horse's body if you're not taking care of the feet. So I beg you, do not skip on this. Do not be tight on this. Have a farrier coming out on a regular basis. I don't know about other parts of the world, but here I feel like a standard trim across the board, farriers usually charge the same amount. Some charge travel, some don't. There might be a bit of a change when you start putting shoes on, or if you have to have any corrective work being done. But I would say it's usually pretty consistent across the board on what a farrier is going to charge. But yeah, budget for it and make sure you stay on a schedule. To me, there is no wiggle room when it comes to farrier and shoeing work. And I guess just tying into the whole vet thing, there's a lot that you can do with your horse just to keep them healthy. Regular exercise, making sure that your horse doesn't get too fat or too skinny, making sure that they're in a well-ventilated area. If you're keeping them in a barn, make sure it's well-ventilated and they have fresh air, they have clean water, they're not, getting into things that they shouldn't. Just keeping them, it's just the basics, you guys. Keeping them healthy goes a long way and will save you vet bills going forward 100%. And lastly, I just want to touch on some just maybe general budgeting tips. So I've gone through a few categories today. So we have, let me go through my list. We have feed, nutrition. We have tack and equipment, which that typically isn't an ongoing cost. If you're just getting into things, that'll be an upfront cost. We have your boarding, or your location, vet and farrier costs, training and lessons. If you're depending on if you're going to compete on your horse, there's costs associated with that. If you want insurance for your horse, there's that. So those are kind of the general categories. I would encourage you to price out, okay, what is this going to look like for me? So for me, I don't know, I budget maybe $100 every 6 weeks for the farrier. I know I'm going to have to pay for hay once a year, typically in October. That's a couple grand. I know I'll have a vet out here for just regular maintenance, probably twice a year. I know I usually want to compete in a show a couple times a year. I usually want to go to a couple clinics. Maybe I want to get some lessons. I have the supplements that I feed my horse. This year I need to buy Junior a new winter blanket. So kind of even use AI. What are the recurring expenses I'm going to have with a horse? Get that list, and then depending on where you are, figure out what those prices are going to be. It doesn't hurt to call up the local vet clinic and be like, hey, I need vaccinations for my horse. They need to be dewormed. He needs his teeth floated, and I just want an overall checkup. How much is that going to cost? Okay, you have that estimate, put it into your budget. Do all of that. times it by 12 or however many times to get like an annual cost summary of what this horse is going to cost you. Maybe add, some for like, again, the emergency vet call. Maybe your horse all of a sudden needs some corrective shoeing or something like that. Or maybe your horse needs a chiropractor treatment because their back is wonky for whatever reason. So like add some additional things like that and be honest with yourself. Where can I potentially cut? Where should I splurge? Where can I not compromise? And is this affordable? I started out this episode saying that you do not need to be a trust fund baby. You do not need to make $1 million in order to afford a horse. But the truth is that horses do cost money. And I don't know if it has come across or not in this episode, but I don't want you to be making compromises, in terms of their care, in terms of their feed, in terms of the tack that you're using on them. To me, you cannot compromise on those things. Like, if you're going to buy a horse, you need to be able to care for that horse. And there is a minimum threshold with that. Like, you can't just buy a horse and think that's the end of the cost. That is only the beginning of the cost. I guess that's what I should be emphasizing. Like, okay, yeah, you spent X number of dollars to buy the thing. We are just getting into it from there. So, if you're, I don't know, making minimum wage, or you have several kids and they cost a lot of money, or maybe your job security is uncertain right now, maybe not the best time to be buying a horse. That's not to say there aren't other options available. There certainly are. But if we're talking about specifically owning your own horse, there is a bit of a reality check, okay? Hopefully that sheds a bit of light on the idea that, yes, horses can be affordable. You do not need to be a millionaire. But you do need resources available. It's not like picking up the sport of soccer. There's a lot more to it than that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Be sure to follow me everywhere at Strong in the Saddle. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe. And until next time, remember, it's always a good day to ride.